Hello, and thank you so much for being here for Magic is Real. I'm Shannon Torrence. I'm your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things spiritual and metaphysical with a focus on near death experiences and other spiritually transformative experiences. If you enjoy the podcast, it's resonating with you, you can support the podcast for free by liking, subscribing, sharing, and please leave comments below. It really makes such a difference in getting the word out that this project exists. Today, I have with me Debbie Ali, who is an author, a coach, a counselor. She is a trauma survivor and had a near-death experience that she's here to talk with us about. And I will say that her experience was very traumatic. So just be aware, we're not going to go into any kind of graphic detail, but um, there is a trauma there that's pretty difficult. So just be aware of that before we start. And Debbie, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story so vulnerably and for your service as a human, because you've been through something that is most women's, especially, worst nightmare, and you've turned it into a way of being of service and, like you said, doing God's work. So thank you so much for being here and thank you for sharing your story.
Yes, no problem, Shannon. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. Debbie, I just want to start with your background. How did you grow up? What's a little bit about you, who you are as a person, and what your spiritual beliefs may have been or not have been growing up?
Okay. Well, um, I grew up on a very tiny tropical island. So, but life was as simple as it would get, the 70s, the 80s. Um, but at a young age, when I say young, perhaps maybe 8 years old, 9 years old, somewhere around there, um, a neighbor of mine decided that he would start taking us to Sunday school at church. And, my parents never really, at the time, followed a particular religion or any sort of uh, any sort of real spiritual belief system. So we just went along with it, being kids, my brother and I. And I to the Sunday school, it's more about storytelling, Bible stories and singing and craft and all of that. And so it was all fun and whatnot. But even at a very young age, I developed this utter fascination with Jesus and God and who is God and who is this Jesus and oftentimes I would ask questions that I think some people were either intimidated to answer, or perhaps they were not sure how they should respond. But in any event, I grew up in the church, Presbyterian church, which is very much on the conservative side in terms of sharing knowledge about the Bible and other spiritual beliefs and so on. They just teach up to a certain extent and no more beyond that. And that's where my curiosity led me. Um, so I grew up, I won't say sheltered, but in a Christian household and a very, how do I say, maybe sheltered is the word, it was school, it was church activities, sports days, those kind of regular stuff, and back home. That was the sum total of my view of the world growing up until I met my husband at a fairly young age, and he was my first boyfriend. We got married, so that was the extent of my exposure to the world or worldly matters. Um, so I've always had a very deep, abiding love for Jesus, not fully understanding what that connection was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds like you weren't super religious, but that you did have a reverence for
Yeah.
Jesus and you understood that there was something more. I'm assuming not you weren't delving deep into it, but you just knew that there was a higher
Yes.
something.
Correct.
Um, and then yeah, so take us to how this all began with your near-death experience.
Well, in a nutshell, my kids were very young at the time. This was on my birthday, no less, in 2006. This took place around maybe 10 a.m. thereabouts. So it's broad daylight. And my kids were 8 and 6 respectively at the time, very young. And fortunately, they were out with their dad, you know, planning some little something for my birthday, right? And I was in my garage cleaning because I love Christmas and I was preparing for, the decorations and all of that. And um, at that time in my country, kidnappings, abduction, crime in general was on, it really spiked. So I was very much aware, okay, these are the conditions under which I live, and so I need to be extremely aware. So I was, because there were neighbors outside, I was within view of quite a few neighbors. And when I saw them starting to, okay, well, this one's leaving, that one's packing up stuff, I said, okay, let me pack up. It's time to go inside. And in the process of doing that, and I kid you not, Shannon, maybe 5, 10 seconds max, maybe even less, I turned my back to close the garage door. And it was just to hit the button. I don't know where these two men came from. Literally, they appeared out of nowhere. One was brandishing a blade, the other was holding a handgun. I I froze. I froze. No one is ever really prepared for that kind of uh, encounter, right? I froze. I felt like all the blood went to my toes. Um, Before I knew what was happening, the gun was here, and I couldn't move. Um, so they, of course, tied me up, and they took everything that they could of value from our house at the time, and then proceeded to take me as well. They wrapped me in one of my drapes, threw me in a vehicle, and sped off to my first location. And from the moment from the moment I kind of internalized, okay, this is a robbery. This is not just two guys wandering in. The first thing that came to my mind was the name of Jesus. I, not my husband, and not uh, my parents, not, oh my God, what do I do? The first thing that came to mind was Jesus. And that was the closeness of my relationship with him. And yeah, they took me to this hole in the ground, like something of a dumping ground for those who lived in the area. They would, old refrigerators and that kind of stuff. And of course, I was blindfolded, so I had no idea where I was being taken. Um, I was beaten in the car on route because I kept rolling on and off the seat and banging my head. I got kicked in my back. I tried, screaming. I was choked, everything. Um, and I was made to sit in that hole for the remainder of that day, um, tied up, handcuffed, blindfolded, and yeah, there was one of the abductors questioned me about my family. He realized it was my birthday from my wallet, I imagine. And he said he had a present for me. Of course, it's all very sarcastic, you know. A lot of expletives were used, and I was just crying. I cried nonstop for about 3 days and 3 nights. I just cried. And but the one constant was the name of Jesus. It was that prayer in my heart and my mind at night. Um, when after nightfall, then I was moved to another location, and that's where the whole ransom negotiating began. Of course, years later we found out that we were actually being marked by these men who kind of planted themselves in our area and chose us for a target. I'm not to this day sure why, because we were not wealthy then, we're not wealthy now.
Yeah.
You know, so but they're wired differently. They have their own perceptions of things, and I was forced to bathe in front of these men because they knew that when they threw me into the hole, and I don't mean they put me in the hole, they threw me in the hole. So my body was badly banged up and scratched and scraped and you name it. Um, and then when they were removing me from the hole, they dragged me up by my arms on my back. So my back is, that's irreparable at this point. Um, so they needed to keep me alive. And so to avoid infections, they wanted me to take this bath to clean the wounds and whatnot. And I just refused and no, no. Of course, I got a beating for that. And yeah, when they started ripping my clothes off, I just, I did it and I curled up in this little tiny ball, trying to hide or preserve some semblance of myself, my womanhood, you know. I knew it was not making any difference because I could just feel them like staring, boring into me. And I did it. I did what I had to do. They gave me somebody else's clothes to wear and handcuffed me to a bed and went on to negotiate that night. Um, of course, needless to say, things did not go their way because nobody has X number of millions of dollars just sitting there waiting to, you know, give it to them. And of course, he was furious. One in particular, one kidnapper. He was furious with my husband for not having that money for him. And as a result of that, he vented his anger on me. And lo and behold, that was my birthday present, which was the first assault. Very brutal, which I will not go into details, but very, very brutal. After which I was just numb. I couldn't even think the name Jesus anymore. I couldn't think. I was just there. I was just existing in this hole, this black, deep black hole of like nothingness, shock, trauma. And then I was moved to where I would remain for the other 13 days and nights. And I was held there by one individual who was referred to as the keeper. And his job was to ensure that I stayed alive until they had their money exchange and all that. That was his function. Um, so they shoved me in a vehicle again, and these were big men. I'm barely 5 feet tall. These men were like in excess of 6 feet, big, built steel tip shoes. Um, this last guy, the keeper, he dragged me out of the car by my neck. So I was off the ground and his arms around my neck. And I'm kicking, I'm trying to scream, but he's choking me. He throws me onto a concrete platform and suspends me from some sort of a pulley above. So I'm hanging by my handcuffs. My feet are still strapped. Um, and he comes back with duct tape to bandage around my eyes just to be sure that he's not seen so that I cannot identify him. Of course, it was too tight and I passed out. So I passed out many times. I know for sure I went into shock 3 times from, I guess, the combination of trauma, um, pain from the sexual assaults, dehydration, lack of sleep. I guess the combination, I know I went into shock 3 times. I passed out maybe at least 3 to 4 times, on different occasions. And when I woke up, he just dragged me inside in this little tiny unventilated room. And I was handcuffed there. And that's where I stayed for 13 days and 13 nights. No free access to a washroom or anything like that. I was given a little bottle of water. Of course, he tried on many occasions to get me to eat. I could not, every time, everything would come up. Everything would come back up. I mean, who can eat in that situation, but nonetheless, when he cuffed me onto that bedpost, that's where I remained, and I was assaulted 2 other times there. One, because he suspected I was toying with the mask. Um, and two, because I asked for a blanket. I was shivering cold. Uh, just for those two things, and it was horrendous, the brutality of it, and what it does to people, what it does to a woman. Men, of course, I'm not excluding men from the horror of this, but women, oh my gosh, it's such a sacred part of who we are, you know, and that was taken from me. And I often describe it just like I described it in my book. It's like someone just sticks their hand inside of your stomach and rips everything out, like your all of your organs just pulled out, and there's this big hole inside of you. And it's there's no other way to describe it, because that you've lost something that is God given, that's yours. It's been taken, not given, taken. So there I was, this sheltered girl, but young woman, sheltered young woman in that situation, and it thoroughly humiliated me, broke me down. And as time went by, I cried a lot, I prayed a lot, I questioned God. I was mad. I was so mad at God. I was like, I went to church. I've always been a helpful, gentle, caring kind of person. I've lived my life to the best of my knowledge in the right way. Why is this happening to me? I mean, okay, if it's something maybe on a smaller scale, why this kind of horror? Why this depth of I don't know. I couldn't wrap my head around why would he allow this to happen to me? And the keeper would leave early on mornings and come back around nightfall. So the entire day I'd be there stewing in my sweat. Um, I'm just letting it out. I'm just letting God have it. Why? 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 And of course, I was not getting an answer. I was not receiving an answer because I was doing all the talking. And eventually, I was worn out. I was just worn out. I said, okay, you know what? I did my best. I did my best with my kids. I did my best with my marriage. I did my best with all those around me. If this is the way you would like me to, okay, I'll die like this. If you really want me to die like this, I'll die like this. After all, your son Jesus, he died on the cross in the most humiliating, horrible way. Who am I to complain? And as soon as I released that burden, as soon as I stopped questioning and trying to figure things out and try to make sense of this whole thing, as soon as I stopped and I stopped questioning him and I gave up, that allowed God the space and the room to move in and actually do something. And I tell people this all the time. I mean, you had to have been there to really experience it. The keeper turned from a beast. He did a full 180. The next day, he was my protector. And at first, as I refer to it, my human side was like, okay, so he's just trying to appease me, so keep me alive, so maybe I would eat or something. And then I realized that this was really divine, because he was not just trying to feed me, he was gentle. He was gentle on it. And he started asking me questions, of course, about my life and all of that. And then he focused on religion. I don't know for what reason, but he did. And he started asking about my beliefs, and I told him about Jesus and whatnot. And he said, yeah, I heard about Jesus, but I don't know much about him. Told me about his life growing up. And I started realizing slowly, if I had been in his position growing up the way he did, who's to say I would not have turned out that way? Who's to say, if that's all you're exposed to, a life of crime and criminals around you? Who's to say, right? Nobody taught him about religion, and believe me, I don't really believe in religion. I believe in the teachings of Christ, and I believe in following his way of life, his way of thinking, his belief system. I think religion is a man-made construct. So when I use the word religion, I use it loosely. And I told him all that I knew about Jesus, and he could not grasp why I would love this Jesus. I've never seen him, never met him. I never had a conversation like we're having a conversation with him. Of course I did, but he could not perceive what I was saying. Why would you love somebody who would allow this to happen to you? And he'd get really, really angry, really mad, like smashing things around type angry. How could you love a Jesus who puts you in this situation, allows you to be assaulted, allows you to be beaten, you're starved, look at your condition? And he's saying it with sincere compassion. I mean, I couldn't see him, obviously. I didn't see light for 14 days, but um, you could hear it. I could hear it. And then I kept telling him, I said, because, I mean, I love him. He is all that I know. He's my best friend. He's the one constant in my life. And then he starts asking me questions like, so if you love this Jesus so much, um, do you think this Jesus will love me? That kind of thing. And I would say, yes. And he's like, oh, that's rubbish, rubbish. He admitted to me, he said, I'm a murderer. I've killed X number of people. And he goes into, he said, I'm a murderer. How could he love me? He said, because he died for you. He died for all of us. He's the same God who created me, created you, and created everyone else. And we all have our own path to follow. I'm not saying I agree with what you did. I'm not condoning it. I don't like it. It's not right. But at the same time, who am I to judge? Right? And I always tell people that was not me. Because there's one side of me that's like, Debbie, what the heck? And then there's God through me. There's the Lord through me saying, shh, 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 let me handle this. It was him speaking. It was him saying, because he asked me if I hated him. And I should hate him. I should have hated him. And I actually thought about it and I said, I really did not feel hate for this man. I did not. I did not. And it's not because he apologized, because he did profusely, cried and apologized. It's because, and then again, the Lord through me said, I did not come to judge. I did not come to cast blame. I came to save. I came to teach the way of life. So, and I told him, I said, if Jesus says that, then who am I to judge you? Again, I don't like it. I don't like what you've done. You've caused me immeasurable damage, right? From which I will be healing the rest of my life. I knew that, but I could not hate it. And then he asked if he could call me his friend because he said I was the one person who has ever been his friend. Everyone else have been, they've been around him in their activities and whatnot, but the one person who actually took the time to speak to him and try to understand him and to teach him something he did not know. And so he considered me his friend. And then he vowed on that day, no one will touch you. He said, I don't know what's going to happen, but you are going to go home to your kids. I refer to them as my babies. I still do, although they're grown now. But he said, you're going home to your babies. No one will touch you unless they kill me. And at the time, I was, again, the Debbie side is like, But then there's the Lord through me, there's this big chunk of me that actually knew. I knew in my spirit what was happening. And the scapular that I wear, which I never take off. I was wearing this at the time. It was the one thing they did not steal from off of me. They took my earrings, watch, everything, but they left that. He asked if he could have it. And I asked him why, because this is of no, you can't sell that for anything, right? It's what, $5, $5 or something. And he says, no, well, if I have that, I'll always remember you and I'll remember what you taught me. And I will know that I will always have that chance to, be forgiven, change my life. And he did not dare take it off of me. He waited for me to remove it and put it in his hand. And he held my hand and he cried and apologized, and then he left. And so that in itself was a miracle. And then there was this other time this is all during the 13 days where he was determined to set me free. So he came in, he totally untied me, my feet, uncuffed me, everything. And he said, listen, he's going to clear a way. I have no idea where I am. So it's like, it's gibberish to me. But what he said was, I'm going to clear a way for you. Just count, try to average maybe about 15, 20 minutes in your head and then just run. Of course, physically, I knew I probably would not have been able to run because I was weak, dehydrated, battered, beaten, torn. But he just left. He just left me there free, sitting on one. Again, the Debbie side is like, must be a trap or a trick or something. There's that little side of me. But the Lord through me was like, calm down, do not move. And I asked the Lord audibly. I asked him, why shouldn't I go? And he said, because if you leave, whoever he's working with will kill him. And then there's a Debbie side thinking, well, so what, right? I'm bait. And again, the Lord is saying, if you move and you leave and they kill him, his blood will be on your hands. In other words, do I trust him enough? Did I trust the Lord enough to see it through to the end? He was testing me. And so I stayed put. And he came back and he was mad. Oh my gosh, he trashed the place. Why didn't you go? I cleared. All you had to do was run and you would have found help at the bottom of some hill or something. And I was like, and then when I told him my reason, he was like, what do you care if they kill me? you know? And I was like, again, it wasn't me. It was the Lord through me telling him, because Jesus did not come to condemn you to death. He came to save. And the man, he could not wrap his head around it. And he refused to tie me, to recuff me and all of that. And I said, listen, if these other guys come in and they see that I'm free, there might be problems. So just cuff at least one hand. I had to ask him. And did it very loosely, very gently. And he left. And negotiations, they tried to drop the ransom 2 times. It failed. They failed for different reasons. And I was losing hope very quickly. I had given up because I was there, lost to the world, essentially. I had no idea what was happening with my husband, with my kids, with my parents. I knew nothing. And about 2 days before I was eventually released, I felt like really tired. Not just tired as you would expect from such an experience. I'm talking soul tired, like soul, spirit drained. And I felt like I was drifting into a sleep. But I wasn't, I was dying. I was dying very quickly because I'd given up. And in a blink of an eye, I was above my body. And I looked down, I saw the clothing I was wearing, I saw the room, everything that was in the room. I always say if I were an artist and I could draw, I would draw everything in the room exactly as I saw it. I saw myself curled up on the right side. And I said, but how can I be there and how can I be here? I'm trying to reason this thing. And so I never stopped being me. It was still me. This was still Debbie looking at my body, or my meat suit, as I like to call it. Because when you know that kind of freedom, not being trapped in this, it's like you're wearing gear. It's like you're wearing all this cumbersome gear, and that's not what you're really made of. You're a spirit. You're meant to be free. And I looked down and I saw like, okay, my chest is not moving. So I'm like, oh crap, I'm dead. I'm dead. Uh, but oddly enough, there was no panic. There was no, oh my God, what do I do now? There was none of that. There was just this peace. And then there was a brilliant white light, the likes of which I have never seen since. And out of that light walked Jesus. There was a knowing. There was no hi, hello, I'm Jesus. No. He walked out, he stepped out, radiating this white light. And I knew it was him. And I dared not look him in the face because I didn't feel like I was worthy. So I dropped to his feet. And I remember just looking at his toes and thinking, oh my gosh, they're so perfect. And he's wearing a sandal. And I'm like this little kid, But it wasn't a sandal. It was he was emanating light from his toes. And he was bare feet, just like I was abducted bare feet. Hence the name of my book, Bare Feet. And I remember just feeling this immeasurable peace and joy and bliss and comfort and everything good all wrapped up in one massive bundle. I did not want to leave his big toe. And in my spirit, I felt, you know what, I can stay here. And I always say, I say it now, even when I'm praying, Lord, I just take me home, please. Like when I'm really tired, Lord, bring me home. I don't want to, you don't have to give me a crown or a palace. I will stay right at your big toe and I'll be happy there for all eternity. And I mean that. That was the feeling. And he picked me up. He lifted me. He said, "It's okay, Debbie. It's okay, child. It's over now. You can rest." And he scooped me up just like a little newborn. I'm an adult, but I'm fitting in his arms, and I snuggled on him right here, just like a baby would. And I slept. And when I awoke, I was on the beaches of heaven. And I'm over his shoulder this way, and I'm looking over, and I'm just in awe of the beauty. There is no color. There are no colors that match what I saw. The ocean, the sand, the greens of the trees, the rocks. There are no colors on this earth that compare. And of course, I often use a reference. It's like holding a yellow crayon to the sun. There's no comparison. And I remember, and then all our communication was telepathic. There was no need. It's not that I couldn't speak. I could have if I wanted, but there was no need to. I thought it. He answered. He responded. I heard. And I looked back and and I realized he's not leaving any footprints. How is that? And his response was telepathically, of course, because you're not meant to go back. And I remember trying to feel sad that I wouldn't see my kids anymore, that I had to leave my baby. I tried to feel sad. I could not feel grief. They were on my mind, like, let's say, there are two apples on the table. I see them, I look at them, okay, there are apples on the table. Like just a thought, but there's no emotion attached to it, no grief. And we walked some more, and I remember there were ripples in the water, so there's life in the sea, fish. There was a horizon, there was no sun, there was no sky. And he knew I was wondering about these things, and he said, there is no need for a sky. It's limitless. Everything is limitless. There's no ceiling. There's no sun. Why? We don't need a sun, because the light of God permeates and covers everything. And that caused me to look around, and I realized, wait a minute, under the leaves of the trees, there were no shadows. I looked at the rocks, and there were no shadows cast anywhere. The light of God permeated everything all around. And as he walked, of course, I'm now walking with him, and I'm squishing my toes in the sand, and of course, in bare feet, it goes into way more detail. The texture of the sand, and I'm like this little kid for the first time. And as he walked, the waves stopped. So the ripples in the water would stop in a dead straight line wherever he passed. And as he moved on, then it would resume movement. And I thought it odd, and I thought to myself, that's strange. And the response I got was, everything must stand still in the presence of God. Everything must stand still in the presence of my Jesus, because so great is his power that even the waters and the fish and the light, everything must honor him. And I just marveled and I marveled. And we got to the end of the beach, and he knew I was thinking about my children. And he said, "Why do you want to go back to your kids?" I said, "Lord, I love them." But there was no ache in my heart for them, oddly. I said it as a statement. He said, "Yes, I know you love them. And do you not trust me to take care of them? Do you not believe that I would love them more than you love them?" And that was the first time that I let my children go. I really let them go. And it was when I let them go that God appeared and gave them back to me. That's when we reached the end of the beach and the light of God appeared, which was even more brilliant. And I heard a voice, and I know that voice. I'll know that voice anywhere. And the voice of God said, speaking to me, a child. This was an audible voice now. Um, I know you wish to go back to your children, essentially, and I will send you back, but you must promise to continue doing my work. And he gives me like almost like a shopping list, bam, 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 bam. And the first thing you're going to start with is this book. And then this image of bare feet appears before me, the cover, the name, the font style. He said, "Do not worry about writing it," because of course he would have known how painful it would be. He said, "I will get you through it. This is what you're doing for me. This is the first thing." And I said, "Yes, Lord." Right away I said, "Yes, Lord, I will do it. I will honor you. I will work for the rest of my life." And sometimes I say, "Stupid me. This is what I get for wanting to come." I could have stayed. I should have stayed. Because it's hard. It's hard when you're trying to do good. You're trying to make a difference, and you're doing God's work. You come under a heavy attack. But I promised him. But I do remember his voice when I was in such awe of his voice. I remember him saying, "My voice is the most beautiful sound you will ever hear. But to those who do not belong to me, it will be the worst sound they will ever hear." And his message to the world, which is how I begin and end my book, and everything I've done since the incident, his message to the world is, "I see all, I hear all, I know all that happens in the darkness and the light, and I save." And I'm supposed to be living proof that he saves. Hence, 2 days after I was released, I started speaking out. And nobody could comprehend how is she even in her right mind, blah, blah, blah. And it was never me. It was never me to begin with. It was all him. Now, when I say him, it's him and her in one being. But I just, it's for ease of, him. And I remember when God's light disappeared, Jesus was smiling. Oh my God. He was so happy. He hugged me in his special way. He spun me around and he put his hand on my head. And that's where he blessed me. There's this amazing warmth that just went like through every strand of hair, all the way down. And I knew he was cleansing me. I knew he was cleansing me because I somehow felt filth, not filth, but something was leaving and he was cleansing me. And as it turns out, he would have cleansed me of HIV, STDs, marks and bruises that the doctors and the police could not understand, because when I was relaying to them the way I was beaten and so on, there were no related marks on my body to reflect that. So the severity of, say, a steel-tipped boot kicking me in the back would have left certain marks that even after 2 weeks would have still been visible. They couldn't find any evidence of the chokings, and they could not find. So they thought I was lying. Why would I make that up, right? Um, but yeah, and then he blessed me, he cleansed me, and we started walking back the way we came from. And as we neared the where we began, walking, we came across the saints. Now, I grew up in a Presbyterian church, so knowledge of angels and saints and Mother Mary and all these things were fairly new to me. We weren't taught that, right? Um, I There was Abraham, Moses, Isaac, Jacob, Isaiah, and Mother Mary, and their heads were all bowed in prayer, and she was the only one that spoke to me. She said her message through me would be that God always answers the prayer of a mother, always. And I knew at that point, God listened to my mom, because at 6 p.m. every single day for 2 weeks, my mom lit a white candle and prayed, she and my dad, and prayed for me around that, at that same time every evening, nonstop without fail. And she knew, she did not believe, she knew that God would send me back to her. And every evening I would feel that warmth. I couldn't tell the time, but every evening I could feel that warmth in my belly. That's weird. But there was something in my spirit, I knew it was her. And that's where Jesus left me. I felt really, really tired. And I curled up in a fetal position on the sand, and I journeyed back to my body. And I remember that gasp, that painful gasp of coming back into this clump. And just like, and all of the pain, everything came back. But I remember the journey back. Oh my goodness. Swirling and dancing and flying with the speed of thought. Unafraid, unhindered by anything and anyone. Through time and space and the spaces between the space and everything in between. It's so difficult. I always tell people I'm supposed to be a writer, but I can't find the words for that traveling experience. And light and free, and then you come back to this. you know Beautiful, beautiful experience. And I came back into my body knowing that I would be free, no longer afraid, because for those days I was waiting to die in some horrendous form or fashion. But when I came back to my body, I knew I'd be okay somehow. And 2 days later, they settled on like maybe 1/50th of the total ransom demand. Who said who that alone baffled the police? How, first of all, they don't keep hostages for more than 5 days max. After 5 days, they either release you or you're dead. Okay, and my file, little did I know at the time, my file after 5 or 6 days moved from anti-kidnapping to homicide. So they were looking for a body. And they could not even imagine that I was alive. And the keeper gave me back my own phone. He cleaned it down and he whispered to me, he said, listen, we're gonna let you go now. But remember when he came in the room, he was so happy. He hugged me and he twirled me around and you're going home to your babies. You're going home to your babies finally. He said, no, I'm gonna give you your phone. Hide it. Hide it, and as soon as we drop you off, rip off the mask and dial the number for your husband. He made that agreement with my husband to do that. He promised, and he kept his word. Police could not understand that. That's divine. So I was released, and that part of my horror story ended. And then there's always the aftermath, which is a whole other story. But I've had many encounters spiritually since then. I've had before, but I've had many after. Oh, and I forgot. When I saw the saints and Mother Mary, I remember Jesus, he told me, he said, Archangel Michael. I didn't know. I knew we had angels, we had guardian angels. I didn't know about Archangel or whatever. You have this certain concept of them. And Archangel Michael was on my left side. And he said, he will stay with you until your work is done. He will protect you. Archangel Gabriel will be on your right. If you ever need help, wisdom, guidance, understanding, call on him. So they were basically, what I understood from that was that they were at my disposal if I needed them. And they have been. They have been. I've seen some things, I've experienced some things. It's unreal. unreal. But yeah, and so that was their appointment. That was my appointment, and I started doing what I'm doing. Not through the book, which has touched thousands. I've I've never turned down one request to speak about it. I've had my own healing journey, which I'll be starting a podcast sometime very soon on that journey on a day-to-day basis and the struggles that survivors deal with: PTSD, depression, anxiety, suicide, you name it. I've been there. Um, Recklessness, all kinds of things. And I've done, how can I continue to do the counseling? I counsel women from all over the world, men as well. Surprisingly, quite a few men have reached out for help in different matters. And I'm there with them. And I do this because, and I make the time to do it. I work only part-time. I do my little thing to try and cover my bills. It's like just like everybody else. I try to cover my bills the best that I can, but I make the time for the counselor because that's what he wants me to do.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. That story is it's so impactful, and it's one that I know I'll never forget. I know that just because you had a spiritual experience doesn't mean that like you said, the trauma does not go away.
Mhm.
Um, I would just ask on a sort of non-spiritual note, just because I think so many people experience traumatic events, and there's so many ways of treating PTSD: EMDR therapy, talk therapy, um, um, lots of lots of different therapies that you can do. But what would you say are sort of the keys to coping? I mean, I can't even say healing, because I know healing is just going to be an ongoing thing. It's not something that's finite. But how are some of the ways that you've learned to cope and manage your
Well,
own trauma?
well, first of all, let me say you're very right. This is like a disease. It's a coping. You have to cope with this. You have to manage it to keep yourself sane, to try to have some semblance of a life. You've got to treat with this every single day. Um, Now there are many different ways, and for whatever reason, I find that people respond very well to me because they know that I know, and just knowing that I've been there and I understand, they feel comfort, this massive load weight lifted off of them, because they can now look someone in the eyes and really say, they understand what I'm going through. She gets it because she's been there. So now let me hear how she's come out of it. Just that fact of just not knowing that you're not alone is a big, big, big factor, because there was no one that I could look at or speak with who understood. And that's why I'm providing this service. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because there was no one for me.
Yeah.
See? But one of the main things, I mean, there's so many different, depends on what you're going through specifically, what's the worst part, but you need to be grounded. You've got to be grounded. And my grounding factor was in part my children, but my main grounding factor was my closeness with God, my closeness with Jesus. If there's nothing grounding you, you're going to jump from this theory to that one to the other. And in the process, you can very likely lose yourself. And I've seen so many of my clients go through that, trying different religions and beliefs and trying to find something that where they feel that they belong. And because I have that grounding factor, it has helped me a lot. But what I teach also are very practical ways to uh, bring perspective to what has happened, regardless of the type of trauma. And these are the daily coping skills, the daily coping things, the everyday thing, the 3 a.m. in the morning, the 2 a.m. in the morning, you don't know what to do with yourself kind of thing. The feeling so filthy and horrible and unworthy, and that you find yourself becoming promiscuous or whatnot. I'm dealing with clients with these things, and I teach them practical ways of coping with it. So my approach is a little bit unorthodox. There's no one particular thing, but I teach them what worked for me. And if it can work for you, great. If it can't, we find some other way.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think being understood, being heard, that's kind of half the battle. And
that's
then
right.
the other things, like you said, it's not one technique, but having that support and saying, okay, well, what can we come up with together so you don't feel like you're doing it alone? Because
That's right.
one, like you said, one size won't fit all. And sometimes
Hmm.
it's going to be hypnotherapy, sometimes it's EMDR therapy, sometimes it'll be something different for everyone. But I'm just so appreciative that you have shown up the way that you have because, yes, while it isn't a pretty story, just it's also a story of forgiveness, of compassion, of um, just understanding God's love, like that it's just all encompassing.
That's right.
And it's the way that you respond to things that I think is the most important in this life, but also now the fact that you're brave enough to speak out about something that a lot of people don't want to talk about because it's
Very
causes
taboo.
shame.
Hmm.
They might blame themselves. It's too hard to talk about because it's so
Hmm.
traumatic and it might bring up memories. But the fact is, you know that you're doing, like you said, God's work, and that by pushing through that discomfort or that fear, any fears you might have, you're helping someone else who's like, I never spoke about this, but look at she's speaking out. And even if they don't speak out, they just feel heard. And it's
That's
such a beautiful message of reminding ourselves that horrible things happen here in this world. It's really hard. I mean, it's really the
right.
worst place to incarnate into from what I understand,
Yes. Yes.
but that at the end of the day, we're going to be okay. Like, it may be hard here, but our souls are always gonna be safe with God,
That's
and I
right.
I think that's beautiful. Is there anything else you want people to know, just in general? Like, if there's one thing you
Mm,
could tell people, what would you want them to know?
mm. Well, I'll leave you with these two things. One, our perception of time is very twisted on Earth. Um, I left my body sometime very early in the morning, and I returned to my body very late in the evening into the nighttime. But to me, that was an entire day. But to me, my time in heaven might have been 5, 10 minutes. So when we call on God, we want this and we want this and we need this help and we're whining and we're carrying on. I'm not saying that life is come on, we know what life is. And we urgently need this help. We must always bear in mind that God is saying, okay, okay, I'm coming to you. But to him, it's 1 minute. To us, it might be 10 years, might be 15 years. So our perception of time and having that impatience with the things that we want, we must always keep that in mind. It's not the same concept. And finally, I'll leave it what God's message is to everyone, whether you're a believer or not. I see all, I hear all, I know all that is done in the darkness and the light, and I save. You call on him, he will save. May not be how and when you would like, because we all have our own way, but he will. He will.
Thank you. Those are beautiful messages. Debbie Ali, how can people find you
Yeah.
if they'd like to work
Um,
with you?
sure. My website has got just about everything. DebbieAlley.com. I guess we'll pin it below. Uh, my email will be there as well, dear DAA4 at Gmail. And my website has got all the links necessary, the blog. And like I said, my podcast will be out soon. And of course, my book, Bare Feet, is on Amazon. It is a bestseller. Not my work, his own, but Bare Feet is on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. You can find it there as well. So yeah,
Great. We'll have all those links below, but thank you for also speaking them in case someone's visually impaired, for example. So
ah,
thank you so much, Debbie Ali. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you. You're such a beautiful person and a beautiful soul, and the work you're doing really is helping so many people. It's just beautiful to witness. So thank you.
I try. Sure.